Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our regular question mark episode of the Dragons.
Yeah, it is our regular episode.
For those of you who don't understand what I mean by that, we've kind of split up some of our content, and we're doing our reviews and miscellaneous chatting in one episode that you'll get on the off weeks that you don't get this. So,
Yeah.
if you want the meat and potatoes of our topic, this is where you're listening to. If you want all the other sides and all those shenanigans, you got to listen to the other
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
I, of course, as always, am one of your hosts, Johnny, and I am joined by my lovely co host from across the country.
Yeah. I'm Kelsey. We are currently doing a mini series on the spiritualist movement. So, in the first episode, we kind of talked about what the spiritualist movement actually was and the beginning of it, which is the Fox Sisters. The Fox Sisters kind of kicked off the spiritualist movement. So, for this episode, we're going to be talking about a very lovely woman. We're going to be talking about her life in general. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to be butchering so many names. So many names. We're going to be talking about the. Huh?
Well, half the names and places that are going to be mentioned here are Slavic. So
Yes.
if we have any Slavic listeners, we apologize.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
sorry.
yeah, we suck. We know. It's okay.
I'm sorry. I can get some of them right. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about Helena Blavatsky.
That is the correct pronunciation.
Blavatsky. I'm getting pretty good. So yeah, we're going to be just basically talking about this lovely woman in general. I have decided to put the society as a whole separate episode. So we'll talk about all the society and all the things that she brought to us, writing wise and words and stuff like that. That'll be in that next episode because I think that all that kind of is together. I don't think you can talk about the society without her writings that she did on later in
And
life.
trust me when I say you will thank us for that.
Yes, this alone, whew, good God. But yes, so we are going to be talking about Helen Blavatsky.
Helena Blavatsky.
Helena Blavatsky. Phew. And there's a lot of Helenas. God bless it. So I'm going to read this before we begin because there's a lot of Helenas because you have her grandmother, her mom, and her. But I am reading The Extraordinary Life and Influence of Helena Blavatsky by Sylvia Granston. It's kind of like she kind of pieced together all the other biographies by her, by all these other people. But she has a footnote. Basically, you have Helena Pavlona. This is gonna get bad. That is her.
I would say I would call my my Moldovan friend and ask him to translate for us, but him and his partner are currently at a wedding.
So Helena was a very common first name in Russia. So the middle names tended to be different. So how you have like Johnson for like last names now, so it's Peter Johnson, you're Peter son of John type thing. Their middle names is what became that like son or daughter of. So Helena Pavlovna, Pavlovna, she's named after Paul. Her dad is Paul. And then Helena Andreasvane, that is her mother because her father's name was Andre. It gets a little weird. So, and then you have our Helena is Petrovia because her father's name was Peter. So I'll be referring to as their grandmother, grandma, mom. But if you are reading material, it does get rather confusing because of there's a lot of names. But I thought that was kind of cool. All right. This is a lot of information. This woman. Whew. So, we're gonna start in Russia. So she was born. Depending on what calendar you looked at, she's either born July 30th, 31st at midnight, or August 12th at midnight, 1831. To parents Helena von Hahn, which is on the Andrea Vinia, the Helena Andre, and Peter von Hahn.
I'm just convinced you're making up words now.
I mean, the amount of I had to eventually go in my notes and put grandma in mom because I kept getting there was the fact that her grandma's name is Helen and then her mom's name is Helena. It's like, God bless it. And then because of her grandmother is Helena PA and she's Helena PE, it gets it gets very confusing, and you'll see why in a minute. So she was actually born premature, and this is kind of a time where Russia had become Christianized. So her family was actually Russian Orthodox, heavy Russian Orthodox Christians, huge. And this kind of plays into a lot of her spiritualist stuff with the society later in life. So because she was born premature, she got baptized and literally not even being 12 hours born. And she's got two bad omens going for her. So the priest in her baptism actually caught on fire because no one was watching her niece. And so for those who don't know, at the time during Russian Orthodox ceremonies, everybody stood up. You didn't sit down. So no one watched that the little girl had sat down with her little candle and she just catches the priest on fire. Yeah. So that's bad omen number one. Bad omen number two was that she's actually born during a cholera outbreak, and it is the Asian cholera that came from East Asia and stuff like that. It's actually one of the worst plagues of cholera at the time. It does actually hit her house. There's a czar's son that actually dies. But it was actually seen as a bad omen to be born during a plague outbreak. She does have one good thing going for her, which I kind of think is kind of a precursor to everything else later in life, is that because she is born at midnight, she has been endowed with power over evil forces in Russian folklore. If you're born at midnight towards the end of the month type thing. Not sure how much truth that is. So this is where it might get confusing because of all the Helenas. So her maternal grandmother, her mom's mom. I wish I could have a family tree for visuals. So her mom's mom was Princess Helena Pavlovna. So during the majority of her childhood, she does live with her grandma. But basically, the princess came from an ancient Russian family called the Dolgorovs. Dolgorovs.
Sounds good to me.
Basically, this family line can be traced back at least 10 centuries to the Grand Duke Rick, who is basically would later become Prince Rick, who becomes the builder of the Russian Empire. So that's where her mom's family basically is a very old aristocratic family. She also she's got a lot of famous people in her family. Like Saint Michael of Tervinikoi, I don't know, and another prince. Her mother was a famous feminist writer. She translated a lot of things actually into Russian. That's kind of where her mom gets her start. Is when her father, Peter, is stationed in St. Petersburg. Her mom starts translating all these books into Russian, so for that people can read them, because she could read in like 3 different languages, including English. But obviously, not everyone can read in English. So,
I mean,
um,
I can't even read in English half the time.
I know. And then her aunt, Countess Ida Han, she was also another famous feminist writer at the time. Her grandmother, her princess grandma, she was also famous within her own right. She was mainly self-taught, and this actually goes to Helena herself, because Helena basically comes because her grandma is self-taught in all these languages. She teaches Helena all these other the same languages plus some, and I think this is kind of where she kind of gets her like spiritualist journey type thing, is she's mainly self-taught in this. um because I mean, at the time, colleges didn't allow women. So her grandmother was self taught, even though her coming from an aristocratic family. But her grandmother spoke 5 different languages herself. She was huge into botany and archaeology. Um, in scientist circles at the time, her writings alone were kind of seen as like huge and big deals. She her work was, I mean, her work was obviously recognized by a lot of people, but Alexander von Humboldt, he's kind of like a major correspondence with her grandma, and like kind of getting her work out there besides like just Russia, to kind of get it to the other side of Europe at the time. Um, Basically, in every biography that you read about Helena, there is such focus on her Russian side. The book I'm reading even goes into her Viking and Scandinavian side of her family, kind of briefly. But her family is also French and German. Her dad's side of the family is mainly German. Her father and her grandfather, her mom's dad, were military men. So just like anything else, when you're in the military, you kind of move around. Um, this kind of plays into her nomadic lifestyle later in life. Her mother hated being nomadic, hated it. Um, I was actually reading that part in the book before we actually jumped on to do this, was about how much her mother hated the nomadic military lifestyle. Absolutely hated it. But the French side of her family actually comes from her mother's side. Her great grandfather, Prince Paul, married a Countess Henrietta de Police. Her father was actually a refugee from France, and served in Catherine the Great's court. So that's where the French part of her family comes in, with kind of like her looks and stuff like that. But basically, their daughter, Prince Paul, and the Countess, their daughter was her grandmother. I'm giving up using everybody's Helena names. I'm done. And then her grandmother later marries Andre Fedjet. He's kind of an administrative field. He would later serve as a governor of a province where everything kind of like stabilizes for her life. But yeah, she's kind of got a military nomadic lifestyle. Her mother absolutely hates it. She does have a brother that passes away super early in life while they are traveling around. And she does have one sister. So we're not really going to talk about them, but we do have that. But like I've said, her moving around, they think this is what kind of plays into her part of her being so nomadic in her life. That is mainly what we're going to be talking about. This woman literally traveled the fucking globe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we're about to start. So in 1837, her grandfather is assigned to become a trustee for the Kalmyk people of Central Asia. This is kind of in a time in her life where her mother separates from her father. Not like divorce separates, but she's like, I've about had it with moving all the time. I'm going to go to where I know my dad is not going to be moved for like a good 6+ months. Because that's like the major thing that her mom hated was like she'd get comfortable, make all these friendships with people, and then she'd hear the dreaded word of, well, we're being transferred type thing. So she knew with her dad getting like this trustee position, she wouldn't have to move. Basically what happens is at this time, her and her mom and her dad are up in St. Petersburg. Her grandfather has to come to St. Petersburg to get his orders anyway. So when they get to St. Petersburg, her mom and her kind of join everybody, leave the dad in St. Petersburg, and go off to wherever these Kalmyk people are. While they're there, they befriend the leader, Prince Tumen. He has his own story about being involved with the Russian army. I'm not going to go into that. But basically, they were practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism. And while she's there, she gets super fascinated with how they practice and everything. And this kind of starts her spiritual journey because this is the first major experience that she has that's not like Russian Orthodox. So this moment in her life is major. About a year later, in 1838, her and her mom moved to Plavona to be with her husband. She taught Helena how to play piano and how to dance. She got her into some dance classes. They next moved to Odissia. This is a major like center for her family. Is Odissia. Like she travels. This is one thing I find is like she travels so far and she comes back to this Odissia. Like she figures out how to get into Tibet, goes back to Odissia. Like it's this weird focal point for her family. But unfortunately, her mother is in poor health. She does learn English while she's there from a British governess. They next move to Slavonia, where one of her younger brothers is born. Then they go back to Poland. Then they go back to Odissia. But unfortunately, her mom does die of tuberculosis in June of 1847 at the age of 28. Her mom actually does have Helena at like 16. And there's a major age gap between her mom and her dad. Like I'm talking major age gap.
Well, that was a common thing back then, though, and not saying it's not weird by our standards, or it might not have been weird by those standards, but that was such a common thing back in the day, though. Is just they weren't really worried about the age gap, or there was no such thing as a thought process on age gap. It was hey, this man can take care of you. This person, and the weird thing is, though, to me, is that it's always an older man and a younger woman.
Yeah.
Which there's a huge power dynamic there, and there's other issues that I have with it, but that was the cultural norm at the time.
Yeah. 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 A lot of the cultural norms will come into play later on. But basically, after her mom passes away, she goes to live with her princess grandma in Stavonia, where her grandpa at the time is governor. While she is staying with her grandparents, she discovers a personal library of her great grandfather, Prince Pavel. He did contain a huge variety of books, and this kind of encourages her interest in a lot of growing topics. Her great grandfather was a Freemason. He belonged to the rite of strict observance. It is around this time that she starts to have these visions of a mysterious Indian man. And she actually would later on meet this man in the flesh. She finds out that he's not just like this mysterious man. He is actually a real person. Now, depending on which source you have, what I'm about to say kind of differs. Depending on where you go. Some say that she went with her father to Britain. However, in her sister's memoirs, her sister does not mention this. So, and this is where I'm going to say, due to her traveling a lot of by herself, there's no second accounts of Helena's travels. So a lot of what I'm about to say, we have to take at face value of this is just what she has said. We don't really have something to back this up in any way of her travels, how she got in Tibet, like all this stuff. Um, but she does end up after being with her grandparents for a while. She does end up living with her aunt Wyatt, and her aunt actually one of her famous children is I think a prime minister for Russia. I think,
Huh.
yeah, there's like famous people everywhere in her tree. But after staying with her aunt for a while, she goes to Tophilis, Georgia, the actual country, not the U.S. state. I feel like I have to put that in there for our U.S. listeners. This is a country outside of the U.S. This is not the state above Florida. like, but that's where her grandfather is stationed. At this time, she forms a relationship with Alexander Vamirovich Galisin. He's a Russian Freemason, and he basically kind of encourages her esoteric interests and stuff. Also, she still claims that she's having paranormal experiences. She's astral projecting, she's astral traveling, and she's still having visits from this mysterious Indian. At the age of 17, she does marry Nikolai Vanmarich Blavatsky. These names. Um, this man was in his 40s. He was a vice governor for a province. No one really knows why she actually married him, but she would go on to later say in her other later autobiographies that she married him because of his belief in magic. They do not have any kids, but I think it's funny that shortly before the ceremony, she tries to get out of it. She's like backpedaling, like, no, this is not what I want to do. But they do unfortunately get married on the 7th of July in 1848. After they get married, they move to Sadar Palace. Here, she makes a lot of unsuccessful attempts to return to wherever her family is, and eventually he just gives up and lets her go. Like, all right, I give. You can go back to your family. So her family sent her a servant and a maid to accompany her back to Odyssia to meet up with her father, and then her and her father would go to St. Petersburg together. So her escorts got her as far as Poti, and then they took a ship to Kursk. And then around this time, Blavatsky would claim that she bribed everybody in order to get out from underneath her maid and stuff. So that way she could travel unaccompanied. And by bribing everybody and getting out from everybody, this starts her 9 years of travel unaccompanied. Like I've said before, we have to take her word for it of her travels, because even in her diaries, there's kind of conflicting events of what's happening and whatnot. Um, but we're not here to talk about that. So after she escapes her escorts, she travels to Constantinople. For those who don't know, Constantinople is Istanbul today. So she develops a friendship with Hungarian opera singer Aguri Mechovich. She first encounters him while saving him from being murdered. She also meets Countess Sofia Keslavia. She would later accompany the Countess on a tour of Egypt, Greece, and Eastern Europe. So after that's kind of done, in 1851, she travels to Paris. This is where she meets mesmerist Victor Machiel.
Von Frankenstein.
So after she goes to Paris, she goes to England. And this is where she meets the mysterious Indian man of her dreams. It turns out to be a Hindu man that she constantly refers to as Master Morya, Morya. Morya? Mora?
Moria.
Mora?
Moria.
Moria? I don't know. This is one of a few masters that she does talk about. Depending on what source you read, they either meant in London or Ramsgate. Either way, she mentions that he has a special mission for her, and he has to travel. She has to travel to Tibet. So she makes her way to Asia via the Americas, and this is kind of where she stops in America for the first time. She stops in Canada, where she kind of seeks out Native American communities of Quebec after reading the journals of Jamar Freedmore. Um, she kind of, I'm guessing to understand, is she kind of wanted to meet like a shaman type person, but unfortunately was robbed instead. So then she goes south. She goes to New Orleans, Texas, Mexico, and then she goes to the Andes. Once she gets to the Andes, she gets on a ship that goes to the West Indies, then to Cologne, and then to Bombay. Then she spent the next 2 years traveling in India alone, following the instructions of Master Moria. um, and he would send her instructions via letters. Um, she tries to get in Tibet, but unfortunately was denied by the British colonial administration. So she then claims that she heads back to Europe via ship. That ship gets wrecked off the Cape of Good Hope, which is the southern part of Africa. But she arrives in England in 1854. It's kind of a hostile environment because there's a war in England is at war with Russia at the time. Um, but she claims that she starts becoming a concert musician at the Royal Philharmonic Society. She then goes to the U.S. She meets Albert Roswin. Rawson. She meets him for the second time. She does meet him on her travels to Cairo. Um, but she then tours Chicago, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco. Then she travels back to India via Japan. This is her second time to get in Tibet. This time, she claims that she is successful because she's accompanied by a Tatar shaman who is attempting to reach Siberia. He thinks that she can actually get him where she needs to go. Or no, he thinks she can get him where he needs to go, and she thinks he can get him where she needs to go. But basically, that's how they get into Tibet. Unfortunately, she does get lost. She meets up with a traveling Tatar group, and they kind of head her back to normal to India, and then she goes back to Europe. So she returns to France and Germany in 1858 to spend time with her family. During this time, she says that she starts exhibiting even more paranormal abilities with rapping and constant creaking sounds wherever she's going. And then in 1860, she travels with her sister to visit their maternal grandmother in Tiflis. This is where she meets up with her husband and they kind of reconcile. They adopt a child named Yuri. Unfortunately, the child dies at the age of 5, and he is buried under her husband's surname. In 1864, Helena falls off of a horse and goes into a coma for several months following a spinal fracture. She says that after she wakes up from this coma, she has gained full control of all of her paranormal abilities. So, yeah. She does some more traveling across Europe. In 1867, she claims that she was in the Battle of Matonia, and she gets injured in that battle. We're gonna go back to Tibet. So she's known for being she's known for her account of Tibet, of the monasteries and stuff like that. This is a weird journey that we're about to go into. Um, so while she's in Tibet, the first time I think, or maybe this is the second time. Yeah, this is the second time after she gets lost the first time. This is the second time she's back in Tibet. She gets a message back to Master Moria, and she gets a message from him to join him in Constantinople. So they meet up. They travel back to Tibet, going through Turkey, Persia, and Afghanistan. Um, And they stayed in the home of one of his friends, Master Kahut Hiomi, which he was actually near a monastery and like a major Tibetan monastery. And so by her account, this is kind of where she learns everything. Because the Master Kahut Hiomi, he taught Tibetan Buddhism. So she claims while she was there, she was taught an unknown language known as Sinsar. So she helps the monks at the monastery translate a number of the texts and helps them preserve them. She does state that she's actually not allowed in the monastery itself.
Because
But
she's a
she,
woman?
yes, I think so. But she claims that during this time, both Master Moria and Kahut Hayomi basically help her control all of her psychic powers. So they, her clairvoyance, her telepathy, how to astral project and do it safely. So she claims that she's on this spiritual retreat from 1868 to 1870. But like I've said, a lot of historians have a really hard time believing what she is saying, because there's nothing to back up what she has said. But what they think happens is because Tibet was basically closed off mainly to Europeans, and if they did get in, they faced a lot of bandits and a very harsh terrain. So they think what happened is she went in from a neighboring country, because the neighboring countries were open to pilgrims and traders. So they think the fact that she went with Master Moria, that is how she was able to get in, was being with him. She kind of was like a pilgrim in a way. And that she might have been mistaken as someone of Asian descent.
I mean, technically, she was Asian.
Yeah. So.
Just the wrong kind of Asian.
Yeah. So I'm learning that the more I read about her, you kind of have to take everything with a grain of salt. Kind of take it with however you want to take it.
Yeah, I mean, while I agree with some of her methodologies, and I've read a few of her books, and
yeah,
oh boy, they are something interesting to read. But while I have read a few of her books, there are certain things that don't rightly line up, and there are certain things that, how do I put this, are complete and utter asinine hogwash.
Mm-hmm.
There are other certain things that are legitimate and that have definite occult foundation in them, through practices of stuff that I have done, things that have been done by other people and have been well documented. So, like you said, take some of the stuff she says with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm.
As with everything with this,
Yeah.
it's just like science. Try it yourself. See what happens. No, you laugh. I'm being serious.
Yeah.
Like,
no, I know you're being serious. It's just, yeah, because some of her accounts are just kind of out there. But if she is to be believed, she is basically the most traveled person of the time, because not a lot of people got into Tibet, let alone a monastery. So in 1870, after her time in the monastery, she basically comes out with a new mission. She wants to prove to the world the new phenomenon identified by the spiritualists, basically the spiritualist movement, that all that stuff is in fact real. However, she contradicts a lot of that when she comes up against other, quote, mediums, and she says that they're fake. So I don't know what we're trying to prove here. So,
you're not a real medium. I'm the real medium, and I can prove it.
Yeah.
I could prove it by reading your mind and telling that you're not actually being a medium.
Yeah, it was a lot of that. So, because this is why it gets a little weird. So she states that the entities being contacted by the spiritualist mediums were not in fact spirits of the dead, but in fact, they were either mischievous elementals or the quote shells left behind by the deceased. Kind of confusing what all that means, but
Well, so elementals are spirits or spiritual forces that exist on one of the elemental planes.
yeah.
In other words, like, some sort of like fire being or something like that.
Yeah.
As far as the husks,
Like,
I would.
yeah. I got the elemental part, but I was like, the shells of the deceased? I was like, that's a
Well,
little.
that depends on how you break down the spirit, and I could.
We could go on forever.
Yeah, if you break down the spirit into a certain way, I can see how that makes sense, but
Yeah.
we won't go into all that.
Not today. So she proceeds to sail to Greece via the Suez Canal. She meets up with another master, Master Hilarion. They then set sail for Egypt via the SS Harmonia. However, in 1871, the ship exploded and she's one of 16 survivors. Then this is where her whole like contradictory thing happens. So like when she gets to Cairo, she helps set up like a medium place with this woman named Emma Cutting. However, she thinks that Emma's a fraud and she closes the place down 2 weeks later. And the form of spiritualism that she kind of gets into is the one that's founded by Alan Kardec. And his form of spiritualism is mainly focused on reincarnation. So, yeah. So she meets up with her friend Metrovich, the person that she meets before her husband. He unfortunately dies of typhoid while visiting her. She then travels to like Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon, and that's where she encounters the Druze religion. In 1872, she returns to her family in Odysseia. Again, Odysseia. And then in April of 1873, she departs. She goes to a couple places before she goes to Europe or before she comes to America. And this is kind of where she takes root in America for a while. She arrives in New York on July 8th, 1873. And she takes up normal, like, minuscule woman jobs, sewing and advertising, and she catches the attention of journalist Anna Ballard. She is a journalist that works for the New York paper The Sun. This is the earliest written record where she claims to get into the Tibetan monastery. But it is unfortunately not long after she does arrive in New York, her father does pass away, and she inherits a huge fortune. In December of 1874, she meets Georgian Michael but Annalie. Basically, he becomes obsessed with her and asks her to marry him. Unfortunately, she is still married to her first husband at the time. So this becomes polygamy, or those who don't know, when you're still married to one person and married to somebody else, married poly. Basically. Unfortunately, he later divorces her because she will not consummate the marriage. And we'll kind of get into her sexuality probably a little bit later. While she's in New York, she hears the news story about William and Haruto Eddie. Becomes very intrigued, so she travels up to Vermont, where they're at, to kind of see what they're about. This is where she meets Henry Steele Olcott. So we're gonna kind of take a big pot. We're gonna kind of talk about them for a minute, and then we're gonna kind of back up. So basically, Henry was there to write a story about the brothers. He gets very fascinated by Helena, and kind of writes a piece about her instead. But after that, they become very close friends. She convinces him to become celibate and a vegetarian, even though she herself was not always vegetarian. It's whatever.
You can convince people a lot of interesting things if you know how to do it.
Yes. So the two of them in 1875 visit mediums Nelson and Jeannie Owen in Philly. She believes that they're not real. He does. But basically, after this, they start their own circular, the spiritual scientists. Or no, they publish something in the spiritual scientists. They call themselves the Brotherhood of Lexor. Um, and from encouraging of the masters, they established the Miracle Club. And through this, they meet William Curran Judge. Curran Judge. He's an Irish spiritualist. So basically, the three of them in September of 1875, the group that they call becomes the society that she's known for, and the society itself. That's where we're going to pause the society. A lot of her life at that point kind of gets very intertwined, especially her books and stuff like that. That gets very much intertwined. And kind of like the latter part of her life does get intertwined with the society because like she retires and stuff like that. So I think that's going to be our pause point for this. So that way, as we talk about the society in the later part of her life, it won't seem a little weird. So, but yeah, she had a very interesting life, Helena Blavatsky. Blavatsky. That's a fucking name for sure. She traveled literally all over. She's a very cultured woman. She did not like to take shit from no one. But I think that'd be a good stopping point. Because you can't take the society out of her life. You can't really talk about one without the other. So, because I'm going to be doing more research on the society themselves. But yeah. So, this is the second part of this episode. So, we did not do this last time. But, so we're going to kind of pull 2 tarot cards and kind of see where they go. I can pull 2 if you want me to.
I can pull one. I just gotta go grab my tarot cards and then.
I was like, I've got mine right here.
I'll pull one.
Okay.
Give me a minute. Let me go grab a deck.
I was like, go for it. Let's see how this rolls. Welcome back. So, we figured instead of for these episodes, instead of doing our book reviews at the end of the episode, we both pull a tarot card and we would kind of see what that would mean between episodes. Kind of like a horoscope type thing. Kind of, sort of. I found a Nightmare Before Christmas deck. Ugh. Actually, it wasn't that bad.
So I'm more of an Oracle fan myself, but I will be pulling a tarot card. I might in the future use an Oracle deck.
You can do whatever you want.
But we'll see.
You can do whatever you want. Because they would play on each other, so you can.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's upside down. The 4 of Needles.
I'm assuming it's gonna be like the 4 of Swords.
I think so. I don't have my thing. I think so. I think it's like the Nightmare Before Christmas version. And it's upside down. I think that's what it means. Wands. Nope, that's cups. I don't need cups. Swords. I said 4, right?
Yep.
Vigilant, retreat, solitude. So when it's upside down, does that mean it's reversed?
So some people do not do reverse readings, but typically yes, that means that it's reversed.
Huh. Okay. So wise administration, economy, precaution, and testament. So what did you pull, sir?
I pulled the 4 of discs or 4 of coins, 4 of pentacles, regardless of, or depending on who you ask and what deck you're using. So I am using the Patchman tarot deck, which Patchman is a really fun, interesting, animated series on YouTube where, at least that's where I found it, where they talk about spirituality and different things. Some of the things are just like ideas and philosophies. Some of it are, some pretty far out there things. But I like a lot of the information they share and I think it's interesting. So I bought the tarot deck that they have.
You would.
Well, they actually send you a PDF of the book instead of like if you're gonna go through the book, where a lot of other tarot decks just have like a little book like you have in your hand.
Yeah.
And this is like a 500-page PDF.
Jesus.
Yeah. So the Four of Coins are Pentacles. Let's look here. This represents a need to move slowly and deliberately if change is required, as
that makes sense.
As the consequences will affect more than just him or herself.
That makes a lot of sense.
So, in other words, move slowly, be cautious.
Yeah.
Take note of what you're doing.
Well, because like if you go into the normal meanings of the Four of Swords, it's like retreat and solitude, hermit's repose. So it's like retreat very carefully with whatever you're doing, if that's what you're going to do over the next couple of weeks.
I would say pull back, strategically pull back, and be reserved in where you need to be reserved.
Yeah, don't show all your cards. Don't let them see everything that's going on.
There they are, all my cards.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
For our listeners, I just pulled up.
You just like this whole tarot card deck.
Yeah. Freaking loon.
So yeah. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at The Wayward Dragons. We do have YouTube available. I do post unboxing videos for those who want to know what's in the Mindful Souls boxes. Please rate, review, and subscribe, and please tell a friend. We are now on Amazon and on iHeartRadio, along with the normal podcasting platforms. So until next time.
I'm Kelsey.
I'm Johnny. Bye.
Bye.